At first, I laughed with everyone else. The wine was flowing, the string lights in the backyard swayed gently with the summer breeze, and someone had just cracked another joke about tech stocks. I offered my opinion, carefully, politely, about how high-yield savings accounts were a good alternative in uncertain markets. Michael, my husband, turned to our friends with a smirk. "Isn't she adorable?" he said, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Sarah reads one finance article on Pinterest and thinks she's the next Warren Buffett." They laughed. Not cruelly, just comfortably. Like it was a given. Like what he said wasn't offensive but obvious. I smiled and took a sip of wine, pretending I wasn't burning inside. I let it pass. Because that's what I always did. That night, after the last guests had gone and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Michael came up behind me as I was drying the glasses. He kissed the back of my head, still smiling. "You know I was just joking, right?" he said. I nodded, not trusting my voice. But in my mind, something shifted. Not loudly. Not with rage. Just a quiet, almost imperceptible snap. I'd spent years letting Michael manage our money. He'd always said I didn't need to worry about it. That he had it under control. That I should just enjoy life. And I had let him. Because I'd believed it was love. Because I hadn't known better. But the way he looked at me tonight, like a child playing pretend, it dug into a place I didn't know was still raw. It wasn't the first time. At family dinners, he'd joke about how I used to think compound interest was a drink. With friends, he'd laugh about how I once asked what a Roth IRA was. And maybe I had. But I wasn't stupid. And I certainly wasn't helpless. I came from a family that struggled. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck their whole lives. I knew what it meant to fear eviction. To split one fast food meal 3 ways. To hear my mom cry quietly behind a closed bathroom door because the rent was late again. So no, I didn't grow up understanding stocks and bonds. But I grew up understanding what happens when you don't. And now I had a comfortable house, a fridge full of food, and a husband who said I didn't need to worry. But maybe I wanted to. That night, while Michael snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. My heart didn't race. I wasn't angry. I was curious. What if I learned? What if, just quietly, I started to understand what he thought I never could? Not to prove him wrong. Not yet. Just to see. Just to remember what it felt like to be underestimated, and quietly prepare. Dear listener, have you ever been underestimated the way Sarah was, dismissed before anyone even gave you a chance? If so, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in her shoes? And where are you listening from? I'd love to greet you from wherever you call home. Don't forget to subscribe to EN True Tales so you won't miss what happens next, because Sarah's journey is just beginning. Mornings became my secret. Michael left for work by 7:15 sharp every day. He'd kiss me on the forehead, grab his protein shake, and walk out the door with the same confidence he carried into every room, like the world already belonged to him, and everyone else was just there to applaud. As soon as I heard the garage door close, I'd slip into my old jeans, tie my hair up, and drive across town to a small cafe near the library. It was there that I met Elena. We'd been introduced at a charity gala a few weeks after that humiliating dinner party. I remember being drawn to her immediately, her calm poise, the way she talked about finances with clarity, not ego. When I mentioned that I'd always felt a little lost about money, she didn't laugh. She leaned in and said, "You'd be surprised how fast you can learn, if you're willing to start." I emailed her the next day. At first, our meetings were simple. She brought handouts printed in bold fonts. Budgeting. Emergency savings. The Rule of 72. She showed me how to track my spending, set goals, and most importantly, how to forgive myself for what I didn't know. "You're not behind," she told me once, tapping her pen against my notebook. "You're just beginning. And beginnings are powerful." I studied. I took notes. I listened to podcasts while folding laundry. I read books late at night under a blanket so Michael wouldn't see the glow from my Kindle. I joined online finance groups under a fake name. Every week, I brought more questions to Elena. I learned how to read balance sheets, compare expense ratios, and diversify a portfolio. I learned the difference between being rich and being financially secure. I learned about risk tolerance, dollar cost averaging, and the emotional traps that derail even the smartest investors. And slowly, the fog that had surrounded money my entire life began to lift. I started using part of my paycheck, money Michael never tracked, to open a Roth IRA in my name. I set up a brokerage account and made my first small investment in a total market index fund. I kept the paperwork hidden in the back of my closet, inside a manila folder labeled craft supplies. I didn't tell a soul. Not because I was ashamed. Because it was mine. It was the first thing I'd done for myself in years that didn't revolve around being someone's wife, someone's helper, someone's decorative accessory. Elena began calling me quietly fierce. I liked that. Sometimes, I'd wonder what Michael would say if he knew. But I didn't need to imagine. I already knew. He'd smirk, maybe chuckle, and say something like, "Ah, look at you playing stockbroker. That's cute." So I kept studying. And I kept growing. And while he thought I was spending my mornings in a yoga class or reading romance novels at brunch, I was learning how to protect myself, just in case the world he built for us ever started to crack. 6 months into my secret journey, I opened my first quarterly investment summary and nearly dropped my coffee. It wasn't a fortune, but it was real. Tangible. Mine. My diversified portfolio had grown steadily, and with Elena's guidance, I had reinvested every bit of return. It wasn't just the numbers that made my heart race, it was the fact that I finally understood what they meant. I remember sitting on the kitchen stool that morning, staring at the report, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Power. Of course, I couldn't tell Michael. He still dismissed my opinions whenever money came up in conversation. Just last week, when I questioned the cost of a second vacation home he was eyeing, he said, "Leave the financial stuff to me, sweetheart. It's not really your lane." I wanted to laugh. But I didn't. I just nodded and stirred my tea. What he didn't know was that I'd already set aside 6 months' worth of living expenses. What he didn't see was that I'd been following the real estate market in 3 different states. I had spreadsheets, backup plans, and a growing network of women just like me who had decided to stop being underestimated. But I didn't just want to be prepared. I wanted to be free. That's when Elena introduced me to another layer of planning: wealth protection, legal structures, financial privacy, tax strategy. I absorbed everything like a sponge. The more I learned, the less anxious I felt around Michael. He still talked over me at dinner parties. Still made condescending jokes about my shopping addiction in front of friends, as if I didn't notice how he hid the credit card bills from a failed crypto investment. But I didn't need his approval anymore. I had numbers. I had knowledge. I had Elena. Then, one rainy Thursday, everything shifted. Michael came home in a rush, soaking wet and visibly shaken. He dropped his briefcase by the door and ran his fingers through his hair. "I need to talk to you," he said, eyes darting nervously. I set my book down, masking the knot forming in my stomach. He explained, breathless, that he'd just invested a large portion of our savings into a friend's tech startup. It was time-sensitive, he said. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I blinked. "How much did you invest?" He hesitated, then muttered, "Almost everything in our joint account." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "You didn't think to ask me first?" His face twisted, defensive. "It was my call. You wouldn't have understood the opportunity. You'd have freaked out for no reason." And just like that, the fog rolled back in, but this time, it didn't blind me. I saw him clearly. His arrogance wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. He didn't just think I was financially clueless. He was betting on it. The weeks that followed were agonizing. At first, Michael was confident. He walked around the house like a man about to become a millionaire. He kept checking his phone during dinner, waiting for updates from his friend, the visionary behind the startup. Every time I brought up concerns, he brushed them off with that same smug smile. "Relax, Sarah. You'll thank me when we're vacationing in the Maldives." But 2 months in, the cracks began to show. The emails from his friend slowed down. Then stopped. The company's social media pages, once buzzing with hype, went silent. Michael started staying up late in his office, whispering on the phone, pacing. The confidence in his voice turned into forced optimism. And then, nothing. He didn't say it right away, but I knew. I heard it in the silence. The day he finally admitted the truth, he couldn't even look at me. "It's gone," he said, staring out the kitchen window. The whole thing collapsed. I didn't see it coming. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching the man who had made me feel small for so long shrink into someone I barely recognized. "We might have to sell the house," he muttered. "I don't know how we're going to cover next month's mortgage." I felt the old fear creep in, the familiar panic of instability. The same dread I'd known as a child watching my parents argue over bills. But it passed. Because I had prepared for this. "I have something to show you," I said quietly. Michael turned, confused, watching as I walked upstairs and returned with a slim folder in hand. I laid it on the kitchen counter. Inside were the statements from my investment account, savings account, and the financial plan I'd built over the past 2 years. He flipped through them in silence. His fingers trembled. "What is this?" "My backup plan," I said calmly. "The one you thought I'd never need." He looked up at me, stunned. "You did all this? Without telling me?" I nodded. "Because you never believed I could. You never thought I should." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I can't believe this. You actually knew what you were doing." It wasn't quite an apology. But it was the closest he'd ever come to admitting he was wrong. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't need his permission to be smart. I didn't need his validation to be strong. I had done this on my own. And now, I had a choice to make. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Michael was still asleep, curled up on his side of the bed, a shadow of the man who used to strut through life like he owned it. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked through the portfolio I'd built. It wasn't just numbers. It was proof. Of patience. Of strategy. Of belief in myself, even when the person closest to me didn't. Later that day, when he finally emerged, his eyes puffy and shoulders slumped, I slid a page across the table. "This," I said, "is the plan. It won't be easy. But it'll work. If we stick to it." He sat down without a word, scanned the page, and nodded slowly. "How did you learn all this?" he finally asked, voice hoarse. I smiled. "Elena." "Elena? Who's that?" "My financial advisor. I've been meeting with her every month, for almost 2 years." He blinked. "You've been lying to me?" "I've been protecting myself," I said, without apology. "From someone who thought I couldn't possibly understand something just because I never had the chance to learn it." He didn't argue. How could he? The proof was right there on the paper. In the plan that might just save us. That week, we made changes. Cancelled unnecessary subscriptions. Renegotiated a few bills. Postponed the remodel he'd been planning for months. But more than the money, it was the shift between us that marked the real turning point. For the first time, he listened. He asked questions, not condescending ones, but real ones. Curious, careful, even a little embarrassed. I saw him begin to realize how deeply he'd underestimated me. Not just in finances, but in strength, resilience, and quiet resolve. One evening, he sat across from me as I balanced the budget. "I wish I'd seen this in you sooner," he said softly. I looked up from the spreadsheet. "You didn't want to see it." "That's different." He didn't deny it. There was a long silence, and then he reached across the table and took my hand. "I was wrong. About everything. About you." I could have said so many things in that moment. But instead, I just gave a small nod. Because forgiveness, like investing, takes time. And I was finally in a position to decide how I wanted to spend it. By month 3, we were no longer teetering on the edge of financial disaster. Not because of any grand stroke of luck, but because we'd followed the plan I'd built: tight budgets, measured decisions, and the slow rebalancing of priorities. Michael had returned to consulting part-time while he regrouped. I, meanwhile, found myself in a space I never imagined, not just managing our household finances, but thriving in it. Elena and I continued to meet, though now our conversations were less about ETFs and asset allocation and more about vision, what I wanted to build next. One day, over coffee at her office, she leaned forward and said, "You know, Sarah, you're a natural. Most of my clients struggle to grasp half of what you've picked up. Have you ever thought about taking the certification course?" I laughed at first. But the thought stuck with me like a pebble in my shoe. That night, I sat at my desk, rereading my notebook filled with diagrams, strategies, and goals. This wasn't just something I'd done out of desperation, it was something I had come to love. So I signed up. Every night after dinner, after Michael had gone to bed, I sat up late, studying tax codes, risk management, behavioral economics. It thrilled me in a way teaching never had. I didn't abandon education, I evolved it. I realized what I wanted to do next wasn't just save our finances, it was help other women like me. Women who had been told, explicitly or otherwise, that they were bad with money. Michael watched the change with cautious admiration. He still carried guilt like a shadow, but he didn't get in my way. In fact, he quietly started doing more, helping around the house, making dinner some nights, and even sitting in on a few webinars I recommended. One evening, he surprised me with something I hadn't expected: humility. "I used to think providing meant control," he admitted, as we sat out on the porch, sipping tea. "But watching you, I get it now. Real partnership means trust. Respect. Not assuming I know better just because I'm louder about it." It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. I didn't respond right away. I just looked up at the stars and thought, I don't need his permission anymore. But maybe, just maybe, we could still build something new, from the ashes of what was, into something healthier, stronger, freer. That night, I drafted my first business plan. Not for a school. Not for a family. For me. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small group of women in the back room of a local library. Most were in their 30s and 40s, mothers, teachers, nurses, divorced, widowed, or simply curious. All of them had one thing in common: they'd been told money wasn't their concern. That someone else would handle it. I looked into their eyes and saw pieces of myself. I titled the session "Reclaiming Control," and when I finished walking them through the basics of budgeting, investing, and knowing your financial rights, something shifted in the room. One woman approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. "You made this feel possible," she whispered. That was the moment I knew. This was what I was meant to do. My business, Clarity Financial, grew slowly but steadily. I wasn't chasing headlines or million-dollar portfolios. I was building confidence, one woman at a time. I became certified, partnered with Elena on select projects, and began writing articles and hosting online webinars. I even appeared on a local podcast called Money for the Modern Woman. Michael, for his part, supported me. Genuinely. There were no more backhanded compliments or patronizing chuckles. When he introduced me at gatherings, he no longer said, "This is my wife, Sarah, she used to be a teacher." Instead, it was, "This is Sarah. She's a financial educator and founder of Clarity Financial." You should hear her talk about long-term wealth strategies, it's impressive. That validation no longer defined me. But it felt honest. Earned. And I appreciated it more than I expected. We still had scars, remnants of the old dynamic that sometimes surfaced in stress or silence, but we also had something stronger than before: truth. Partnership. The hard kind, the messy kind, the kind that's been tested and didn't collapse. One afternoon, I found my old financial notebook while reorganizing the closet. I flipped through the pages, each one a marker of fear, determination, and growth. At the back, in messy handwriting, I'd written, "Don't wait to be respected. Act in a way that demands it, then never settle for less again." I smiled. That wasn't a dream anymore. That was my life. What can we learn from Sarah's journey? That independence isn't just about having money, it's about having a voice, a plan, and the courage to act even when no one believes in you. Sarah didn't fight with anger. She prepared in silence. She protected her dignity. And in the end, she didn't just save her family, she saved herself. What do you think of Sarah's decision to keep her plan secret until the right moment? Type 1 in the comments if you supported her. Type 5 if you think she should have told him earlier. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more powerful real-life stories, only on True Tales. We'll see you in the next one.